Koka's empire was celebrating his princess's upcoming birthday, and while she was getting ready, the ceremony was over. Yona was not happy with the color of her hair, bright crimson, and the fact that it was always so unruly. The emperor replies that it's not like that at all. Hak, the tall guy with the big spear, agrees. Huck looks up and adds that the only thing she has a problem with is brains. Yona tells her father to punish this insolent and useless cretin. The emperor asks them to calm down, as they are childhood friends. Besides, Hak is one of the 5 generals defending the palace. Yona didn't care. Yona says that if they need guards, then let Dad look for someone prettier. Speaking of good-looking, Hak asks if the princess needs a makeover, since Suwon is back. Yona twitches and says she should have mentioned it earlier. The emperor now understands why his daughter is worried about her hair. But he didn't understand why it happened at that moment. Yona ran through the palace with a smile, wanting to see her cousin Suwon, who was 3 years older than her. After a long time, Yona kept running, holding her dress, and ran into a guy. It was Suwon. He said she was as energetic as ever, and said she was a good girl. The princess asked hopefully if he would stay with them for a while, and Suwon replied that he had come to celebrate her birthday. He started to look around, and after asking where His Majesty Hak was, he went to find him. Yona was upset at being seen as a child. She was trying to look more mature. Hak had been standing next to her the whole time, and so, with a disinterested look on his face, he said that all of Yona's efforts were for naught. She remembered her childhood. Little Yona walked, while a worried Suwon waddled behind her. The boy said that the princess hadn't eaten anything lately, and that His Majesty was worried. Suwon threw his kimono over her and hugged her from behind and told her that everything was fine now, and no one would see her, though she could cry if she wanted to. She couldn't sleep because her mom had died. Suwon said he would be the princess's mom, and that she needed to eat first. In the evening, they lay on the same futon, and Suwon promised that he would hold her hand until she fell asleep, and if she wanted to cry, he would wipe her tears away so no one would see. In reality, the day after the young man arrived, Yona went to his room, but Suwon wasn't there. So the princess asked her father, and a servant passing by where he was. The boy prompted that Suwon was with General Hak. They were sitting on their horses, holding arrows and bows. The emperor said with a soft smile that they hadn't seen each other for a long time either. Meanwhile, the young men had snapped out of their seats. They ran in a special area, aiming at targets as they went. Hak hit exactly in the middle, while Suwon missed by a couple centimeters. They praised each other for their skill. Yona stated that she wanted to shoot with Suwon. The man walked up to the balcony they were standing on and told Yona to ride with him. Suwon gave her his hand and asked her if she liked horses. Yona was embarrassed by his voice and breathing. Suwon hurriedly denied the rumors of his engagement. Yona, hoping to arouse feelings of jealousy, said that she too had recently been proposed to by Hak. Suwon congratulated them and left. Yona felt sad and alone with Hak, not knowing how the young man could fall for such a blatant lie. Then the emperor came and said that it was time for her to think about actually getting married. Yona loved Suwon and wanted to marry him. Her father said she couldn't do it. The girl jumped up from her seat, warning that she didn't even want to hear what her father had planned for her life. It was the duty of the emperor to choose a worthy successor to himself. Yona did not understand what was wrong with Suwon, for he, unlike her father, was not a coward, except that the man who would be by her side was in danger. Yona sat outside and felt sad. There was a rustling sound from the side. Yona thought it was Hak again, but it was a stranger. Princess got up and ran and eventually wandered into a room. Her mouth was covered from the back. It turned out to be Suwon. Yona said that a stranger chased her. Suwon looked out, but there was no one outside. Yona began to worry for her life. Suwon noticed this and hurriedly covered her with his kimono. Yona cried and said she couldn't stay with him. Suwon understood. She was engaged to Hak after all, so he was going to walk her to her room. Suwon offered to escort Yona out and then question the guards. She ran to him and wanted to grab his shoulder, but he threw her hand away. Yona had made it clear to him that love was impossible between them. The girl asked what would happen if it did happen. Suwon, embarrassed, replied that he couldn't afford to see Yona as a girl. All this time he thought of her as his little sister. Yona noticed that Suwon was uncomfortable around her, and that was something. 5 days later, Yona's 16th birthday banquet was held. Her father cried at how mature she was. It was then that Su-won appeared. Yona immediately ran to him even though her father was against it. In the garden, he gave Yona a beautiful hairpin. Yona had unruly hair with a strange color, so she was sure that the barrette wouldn't go with it. Su-won liked the princess's hair. Just then, Hak came in and said that the princess was being sought by the emperor. She was going to talk to her father again, so she ran to his room. For some reason, the door to his room was open, and there were no guards around. The princess opened the door and saw Su-won holding the sword that had stabbed the emperor in the heart area. The young man pulls the sword out of him, and the dead body falls to the floor. Yona falls to her knees beside her father. The girl asks him to call a healer. Su-won replied that the emperor won't wake up again, 'cause he killed him. Yona was shocked. Meanwhile, Hak was sitting on the stairs at the main entrance of the palace. Min-soo brought him a drink. He thought Hak would be guarding the princess's chambers, but he replied that she was with Su-won now. Min-soo was glad that Princess Yona's feelings were mutual. Hak wanted them both to be happy. And while he was thinking about it, Yona was thrown out into the palace and was about to be killed. Hak noticed that it was too quiet around him. He saw the guards who were plotting. They attacked him. Yona was sitting in the room at that moment and didn't understand why Su-won did that to the emperor who loved him like a son. The young man had nothing against her father until a certain point. He remembered his brother, his father, who was braver and better in many ways than the current emperor. 10 years ago, for some reason, the former Emperor Jun'an chose a weak-willed son as his successor. All the people were puzzled, but Su-won's father wasn't upset even then. He was going to fight to defend the empire and his brother. The boy was proud of him. He wanted to follow in his father's footsteps, except that when the new emperor ascended the throne, killed his own brother for some unknown reason. Yona remembered that it was an accident, but that's what the official version said. In fact, His Majesty had stabbed Yu Hong, his brother, with a sword. That same Yona's father, who hated weapons, had killed Yu Hong with his own hands. Now the princess had to understand Su-won's motives. He had avenged his father, and in his memory, the young man was going to become the new emperor. Yona wanted to believe it was just a nightmare. The young man didn't expect her to wake up at such a late hour, and the princess just wanted to tell her father that she would never forget Su-won. Just then, that black-haired stranger walked into the chambers. They already had everything ready for the coup. He told Su-won to kill Yona without anyone knowing. The room lit up as Yona began to lash out. She took advantage of the commotion and started running away. Unfortunately, she was caught by guards in the palace courtyard. They pointed their swords at her. The girl couldn't believe that the young man hated her the whole time. The guards were about to attack, as Hak scattered them all with his spear. He didn't understand what was going on there, and apologized for leaving the princess behind. Hak was on Yona's side, and wouldn't betray her father. He asked Su-won where the emperor was. He replied that he had sent him to the underworld with his own hands. Hak immediately attacked his former friend. The black-haired stranger wanted to come and help Su-won, but Su-won said not to approach him because Hak would blow his head off. He is the soul of Hiryu Palace and one of the 5 generals. Koki's Thunderbeast. Hak couldn't believe that Su-won had the conscience to kill their emperor. The same believed that Koka didn't need a weak ruler. Hak was able to wound Su-won during the fierce battle. The guard, meanwhile, was ready to kill Yona. Hak was put in a stalemate. He thought he could trust Su-won with the princess. Gae-suk, a guy with long black hair, said that they who grew up in the palace would never understand Su-won's feelings. He asked him to be quiet. He promised to destroy anyone who got in his way and put a sword to Hak's neck. He and Yona were saved by an arrow that diverted everyone's attention. The young man couldn't miss this chance, so he raised his weapon with his foot and pushed all the guards and Su-won away. The one holding Yona was hit in the forehead with a spear stick. Hak picked up the princess and ran to wherever he was going. Gae-suk ordered everyone to catch up with them while Su-won just stood there frowning. Hak didn't know how to escape from the palace and Min-soo came to the rescue. He was the one who fired the arrow. Together, they broke through the guards to rescue the princess. Hak easily defeated everyone. They hid behind some bushes. Min-soo asked if the emperor was really dead. Couldn't believe it either. Min-soo was going to buy time so that Hak and Yona could escape. He promised to join them later. Putting on his princess kimono, Minsu asked them to be careful and ran to distract the guards. Yona was still in prostration. Hawk picked her up and ran through the gate, fighting off enemies along the way. Minsu, mistaken for a princess, was killed by a few arrows that were shot into his back. He remembered all the good things that had happened to him. Hak and Yona ran into the forest. The girl couldn't move that fast, because she had spent her whole life in greenhouse conditions. They decided to take a break. Yona realized that Minsu was dead, and that she would probably die soon too. And they wouldn't let Hak live. The young man wasn't going to give his life to Su-won. Yona asked Hak not to die, or she wouldn't forgive him, and fell asleep. Couldn't believe that the princess was left without a father. In the morning, Kaesuk tells Su-won that they have scoured the entire forest. They couldn't find anyone. People are beginning to suspect something. Kaesuk asked what to do next. Meanwhile, Hak was telling the princess to get up and walk. Yona couldn't forgive herself for never thanking her father. Tears ran down her cheeks. The young man immediately hugged her. Yona was surprised. Hak said that it didn't matter where they went. The main thing was that the princess should stay alive and be able to fulfill her duty to her father. On her 16th birthday, she lost her home and all the people she loved. She was going to live for her father and the friends she would meet in the near future. Hak and Yona were walking through the forest. The girl was wrapped in a cloak. She was obviously unwell, so they crouched down by a tree to rest. The princess had never encountered an obstacle before. Hak remembered a situation that happened a few years ago. He was sitting eating an apple when Moondok came up to him and told him to report to the meeting. The boy was not interested in listening to the speeches of their simply simple-minded emperor. The old man called Hak a moron and told him to call him not by his first name, just Grandpa. The young man started to resent the fact that they weren't even blood relatives. But Moondok said the power of love was more important. The emperor stopped their banter. Yona's father said that when Hak stopped coming to the palace, it was noticeably quieter. The boy replied that commoners like him were not allowed to go there. The emperor noted that Yona missed him too. Hak called him simple-minded again, this time right to his face. Moondok slapped his grandson for that, so he knew who he was talking to. The emperor was not angry. He liked Hak for his straightforwardness. He offered him a job at the palace as Yona's personal bodyguard. But it was too much trouble for the boy to be a palace guard. He didn't want to have anything to do with the imperial retinue, because they were always plotting intrigues. Hak also didn't want to become Yona's bodyguard because he wasn't himself around her. He went to the back of the palace, and then Yona ran up, asking him to hide her. The princess was being called out by some guy. It turned out he was courting her. Hak started laughing at her, and then asked why she wouldn't tell this Taejun that her heart was already taken by Su-won. Yona couldn't say that because then Su-won might find out how she felt. Hak said that in that case, she should find common ground with Taejun. Yona called him indifferent and added that Su-won would never say that. Hak got flustered and answered her rudely, then left. He wanted to go home quickly. The princess found him. Yona brought him some fruit and apologized. She thought that Hak was angry with her because of her cowardice, so she promised to deal with Taejun herself. After a while, the young man overheard the conversation of the guards. Those did not put the emperor in any way. Not far away, the very same Taejun was keeping up with Yona. The guards didn't know what to do, because that guy was the son of one of the generals. Hak didn't want to get involved, but in the end, he had to. He called the princess his favorite so Taejun would leave him alone. So Hak became Yona's bodyguard. The emperor was glad because he trusted the young man. Now, in the present tense, Hak vowed to protect her. After her mother died, Yona was going to be cheerful so her father wouldn't cry, and Su-won and Hak tried to cheer her up. It was snowing at the time, and playing in the cold had sapped Yona's health. The boys were sitting next to her, and after a while they got sick too. Moondeok, Hak's grandfather, visited them first, then Yu Hong, Su-won's father. Both boys cheered up, and only Yona was sad that her father didn't visit her. She didn't want to eat because of that. Outside the door, a servant was discussing the emperor, saying that he was so cowardly that he was afraid of getting infected. Su-won wasn't happy about it, and told them to shut up, and Hak said that Yona's father was busy and that he respected him. During the night, the princess's stomach was rumbling, so Su-won asked him to bring her some food. It was porridge with chicken, Yona's favorite dish, but it was somehow unpalatable. And then the emperor came. He was the one who made that porridge as a sign of apology. Yona decided to eat it since her father had tried so hard. When they recovered, they were sad that they wouldn't be able to spend time together like this. Yona woke up and was startled not to see Huck in the middle of the forest. But he immediately appeared from behind the bushes. At sunset, they were roasting fish that the young man had caught over a fire. He asked the princess to eat, because he didn't know when they would be able to do it next time. Yona was getting weaker and weaker morally. Su-won had destroyed their world. Ak hated him because of that. It was already evening when Yona suddenly started fidgeting, looking around for something. She had lost her hairpin. Yona thought she didn't need her anymore. Su-won had betrayed them after all. She ended up going to look for her anyway. Memories of her father's death began to surface in her mind. A snake appeared in front of her. Su-won's words crashed into her thoughts. When the snake threw itself at Yona, Huck slashed at it. They stepped into a nest of snakes. One managed to bite Huck as he lifted the princess in his arms and ran. He told her to consider it her weapon and use it to survive. Huck was there to do just that. He treated his wounds as best he could and pulled out the very hairpin, asking if that was what Yona was looking for. He took her hands. Huck couldn't forgive Su-won, however. He wanted the princess to live more than anything. For the sake of the hairpin, Princess went somewhere for the first time since the incident. If this was her motivation to live, then so be it. In the meantime, Su-won was still getting accustomed to being the emperor. When Yona woke up, the first thing she noticed was Huck's wound. He smiled and said he was fine. Some small snake bite wouldn't kill him. The princess offered to go down to the village for medicine and sustenance, but that was too risky. They only had to go to the capital city of Fuga, place where Huck had grown up. 2 guards were sleeping at the main entrance. Huck slapped them on the back. They began to explain that they were the Wind Clan, and that their existence was like the breeze. The people, having spotted Huck, came running to question him. No one knew what the princess looked like, so Yona was a common court lady to everyone. When she was bombarded with questions, the girl fainted. Huck carried the princess into the room. His old man had left for the meeting of the 5 clan heads, but it was strange that Moondok, a retired man, had been called. The heads, meanwhile, were sitting around the table. They had already been told that the emperor was dead and that Huck and Yona were missing. Everyone looked at Moondok. The head of the Fire Clan began to lash out at him, saying that there were rumors in the palace that Huck had killed the emperor and stolen the princess. The Water Clan head asked him not to jump to conclusions. Just then, Su-won appeared. He officially announced the death of the emperor and the disappearance of Huck and the princess. He said not to divulge this information because it could cause havoc in the empire. An infighting could start between clans. The clans, however, can act together to prevent neighboring kingdoms from attacking. The late emperor gave away some of his state's lands to avoid conflict. This has noticeably shaken Koki's influence. They urgently needed a new emperor. Kaesuk nominated Su-won, the only blood relative of the imperial family. The head of the Fire Clan was in full agreement with his nomination. No one else objected. Only Moondok stood up and was about to leave. But he wasn't going to be left alone. It could be considered treason. Su-won couldn't become emperor without the consent of all the clan heads. The coronation was scheduled in 3 days, and Moondok had to be there for the good of the people. The Fire Clan chief was on the side of the traitor Su-won. He asked him to be ready to suppress the Wind Clan's rebellion. Meanwhile, Yona finally woke up. A small boy brought her food, and the girl cried because it was warm. It had been a long time since she had lived in normal conditions. The boy called her strange. Ian was Huck's younger brother. He asked who Yona was to him. She said they were sort of friends, and at those words, the very same 2 guards from the main gate came out. They started to get dramatic. Huck came in and reminded the princess that she was a court lady on probation. The guards started laughing at him, and Huck kicked them. Taeyong asked what his older brother was like in the palace. Yona called Huck rude, insensitive, arrogant, and not cute at all. The young man stopped her story while the guards continued to laugh with him, cheering Yona on. The girl was glad that Huck grew up in such a family. Taeyeon also inquired about the palace. If there was a table full of food, there really was, but the food here seemed tastier to Yona. Huck was surprised and smiled. He was glad to have such a princess. A little later she went for a walk, and when her name was called Rina, she didn't respond right away, forgetting that it was a cover name for all her banishment from the palace because of her inability to cook and do laundry. The woman who stopped Yona promised to teach her everything, so she shoved the laundry into her hands and left. Huck came to the rescue. He took most of the clothes and told her to follow him. Yona was indignant because she could play a musical instrument and dance. Huck called it a cacophony, but all in all, he was glad to have the old princess back. Taeyun was much nicer to Yona than Huck. As it turned out, Moondok had adopted him too, but Taeyun was too weak. They had just come to the river to wash their clothes, but there was no water in the river. This river is the Wind Clan's everything. The villagers gathered and started trying to find a solution to the problem. Moondok arrived, and Yona immediately ran to him and hugged him. He was like a grandfather to her. He was glad that the princess was alive. Hangdae, one of the guards that stood near the gate, went up the river to find out where the river was going. As it turned out, the Fire Clan was worth a platinum, thus cutting off the Wind Clan's access to water. They had also beaten Hangdae. The clan warriors wanted to avenge their comrade, but Moondok calmed them down. It was dangerous, and the river was only a warning. The Fire Clan wants to enthrone Suwon. They started their statement because Moondok didn't support it. Yona was horrified, but the old man hurried to cheer her up. He wasn't going to recognize Suwon. It would be like recognizing Huck as the Emperor's assassin. The Fire Clan wouldn't dare to do anything serious. Taejun wanted to harass the Wind Clan as much as possible because of his resentment and not becoming emperor, so he ordered a fake attack on the merchants. That way, the Wind Clan would be left without water. Yona was worried about the fate of the Wind Clan. Taeyun came to invite her to dinner. The princess didn't understand why they were giving her everything in abundance when they didn't have enough water themselves. Hawk had ordered her to be well fed, and it was customary for guests to be honored. Taeyun wanted to say something else, but he didn't have time. Fainting. He needed to take medicine, and the merchants who were supposed to come to them were seriously hurt. The people were outraged because of Hawk and Moondok's inaction. It was clear to everyone that they were the Fire Clan, but to go against them was to sully the imperial family. They couldn't put the Wind Clan in danger. Hangdae was ready to go to the doctor to get medicine. Hawk tried to calm everyone down with his speech by giving orders. By the evening, Taeyun was feeling better. Yona wanted to help in some way, but Hawk told her to live a carefree life. He went to Moondok's place to talk and have a drink. Hawk asked him to approve Suwon's candidacy. It was for the well-being of the Wind Clan. He planned to leave Yona there. The old man wasn't ready to let his grandson go, but that was his order as the head. Huck went to the armory in the middle of the night, breaking down the door. He was looking for a short sword and a bow. The man in charge told him he was going hunting and gave him a whole sack of coins. Usually Hawk asked for a loaner. Hangdae also returned there with medicine, and Taeyun felt better. Yona met the aunt who had earlier shoved clothes into her. This time the woman asked for help carrying a blanket to the house where they had put the injured traders. Yona was horrified at the condition the people were in, and all for the sake of Emperor Suwon. Hangdae hurriedly reassured her that with Huck, they could do anything. In the morning, the princess looked for him. He was just saying goodbye to his younger brother. Yona thanked Taeyun for caring. The boy was upset that the princess was going to leave them since he had already grown attached to her. She promised to never forget him and the other villagers. Taeyun promised Haku to protect Yona, but that was no longer necessary. Meanwhile, Hak was already passing through the gate. Tae-woo, the second guard, was there. Hak had asked him to take care of her, and as it turned out, Tae-woo knew that Yona was actually a princess. It was troublesome for him to keep an eye on both the clan and her. Hak was about to leave, but Yona caught up with him and said she was going to leave, and he should go with her. She didn't remember letting Haku leave without her, but the young man wasn't going to take her with him. Yona wasn't going to let him go because she needed Huck. Of course, he couldn't leave her behind. Moondok came to say goodbye to them. Yona asked him to protect the Wind Clan. The old man said they would always be at her side. Taejun had been told off by his father for being Awal in the Fire Clan, and so he was in a bad mood. But then his assistant came in and said that the princess and Haka had been seen in the vicinity of the capital city of Fumi. They were heading toward the northern mountains. Taejun was going to catch them and take revenge on Hawk at the same time. Meanwhile, Yona and Hawk were on their way to the priest who could tell them what to do next. This priest lived near the palace and was involved in handling imperial affairs. When Yu Hong, Su-won's father, started to pressure him, he left the castle. Now, he lives far away from people. Yona and Hawk walked along the cliffs to find the priest's house. The young man asked how they would sleep there if it was cold at night. The princess said, as if nothing had happened, that she would just snuggle up to him. Hawk dropped his spear in surprise, and as he picked it up, he felt they were being watched. They were surrounded by soldiers of the Fire Clan. Hawk wasn't intimidated by the enemy's clear advantage. Soldiers were rolling down the slope toward them, but they were defeated by Hawk with a single swing of his spear. The princess stood behind him. Tae-jun appeared at his side. As he introduced himself, Yona and Hawk pretended to contemplate the beauty of nature. The young man openly quipped at him, saying that he didn't realize Tae-jun was talking to him. Hawk isn't a general anymore, after all. Tae-jun didn't care about the Wind Clan, for he just wanted to defeat anyone who would get in his way. Hawk fought off the arrows while holding the princess close to him. All the soldiers rushed towards him at Tae-jun's order. Hawk was running away with Yona in his arms. At one point, they had to run and the princess fell, tripping over an arrow. The archer wanted to kill her, but Hawk protected the girl with himself. An arrow pierced his shoulder, but he just pulled it out and quickly fled with Yona. He left her in a less safe place and returned to the battlefield himself. The sun was going down. That arrow had turned out to be poisoned, and they knew that Hawk would protect the princess with himself. The princess heard everything and reassures herself that the young man will manage on his own, and she will only hinder him. But then she realized that she had left Fugo's capital precisely to become braver. She ran out and pushed the archer, who once again wanted to shoot Hawk. She looked at Tae-jun with a murderous look. He started lying to her that he had come to take her with him. In his opinion, she was unhappy because of what had happened. He offered to take revenge on Su-won for everything together. Hawk saw what was going on there and started to get worried. Yona asked Tae-jun why they attacked the Wind Clan if it was against Su-won. He started to justify that it was all his father's orders, but Yona knew perfectly well that he was lying to her, and she wasn't going to waste her time on him. Tae-jun was afraid of such a princess. The princess had changed. The fire in her eyes blazed furiously, and there was no doubt that she would not back down for anything. Hawk was angry at Yona for stepping out and continued to fight. Everything started to swim in his eyes because of the poison, and he was badly wounded in the shoulder. He almost fell off the cliff, but barely managed to grab onto the rock. Yona ran to him, but Tae-jun grabbed her by the hair and wasn't about to let go. Then, the princess pulled his sword out of its sheath and cut off her hair. Nothing could stop her. She continued running towards Haku and managed to drive away the soldiers who wanted to throw the young man off. They were about to kill Yona so they wouldn't get in the way. But Tae-jun stopped them. Yona's eyes blazed with a fierce fire that made the guards begin to fear her. She immediately started to help Hawk up. Tae-jun told them to pull the princess away, but they didn't have time. Hawk and Yona fell off the cliff. Tae-jun went into a rage. He wanted to save her. The guards said she was already dead. The Fire Clan leader's son became desperate. He immediately went to Su-won to tell him what had happened. It was nighttime. Tae-jun handed him the package containing the princess's hair. Gae-suk said that what he had done was pure betrayal. Tae-jun agreed with him. He came to Su-won for severe punishment. Tae-jun was shocked. He told Tae-jun to stay behind to attend the ceremony the next day. He couldn't forgive himself for Yona's death, so he started to get hysterical, asking for a proper punishment. But Su-won didn't listen to him anymore. He walked away from everyone and looked longingly at the princess's hair, remembering the past. A kid was walking in the forest humming a song and came across Hawk with Yona. At this time, Su-won was bathing in the river when the new head of the Wind Clan came. A memory with Yona and Hawk popped up in his mind. There, Su-won had said that he wished he had a bodyguard as strong as the princess. Hawk had then told him to become an emperor by marrying Yona. He would then instantly become Su-won's right-hand man. Only he needed 3 meals a day and an afternoon nap. Su-won snuggled into Haku's shoulder and called it a beautiful dream. Only in reality, he had already lost his right hand, and the girl who gave him warmth. And so Su-won became the 11th emperor of Kuki. All the clan heads bowed their allegiance to him. Moondok wanted an answer to the question of what Suwon was willing to sacrifice. The new emperor promised to restore Kuki to its former glory, and would defeat anyone who got in his way. Even if it was the gods themselves, Moondok wanted to see a smile on Suwon's face again. Meanwhile, Yona woke up in the house of Yoon, the handsome stranger who saved her and Hak. He was surprised that the girl had survived falling from such a height. She immediately grabbed Hak. Yoon was able to get the poison out of his body, but he had a wound on his chest and his whole body was bruised. He also broke a couple of ribs and lost a lot of blood. If Yoon had found them a little later, Hak might have died. He had saved Yona during the fall. Yoon wondered if they were lovers by chance since Hak had been so desperate to save her. But they weren't, and Yoon felt sorry for the guy. Only now did Yona realize that they were at the bottom of the gorge. He said she was looking for someone. Just as a strange man entered the house, he was covered in mud and once more fell down in front of them. He was glad Yona was awake. Iksu, the same man, was sad for the girl. He started to cry, but Yona said she was almost unhurt. Iksu was just surprised that they had the princess herself as a guest. She was surprised that he knew about it. The gods had told him about it. He was the priest. Iksu knew in advance that the princess would come to them. He was chased out of the castle for making ambiguous prophecies. Bin was surprised that Yona, who lived in the palace, didn't know anything about the priest. She really didn't know about the affairs going on in the palace. Hak began to have a fever. Yoon treated his wounds, warning him that the fever might get worse by evening. He's not a real doctor, so it was impossible to get his hopes up much. Yoon also lashed out at the princess for still not thanking him for saving her, and asked if she had ever thanked Hak. Iksu hurriedly reassured her, saying that the god of death hadn't come for the young man yet. He told Yoon to be gentle with Yona. The priest called her out for a walk. On the way, he fell down. They stopped to watch the sunset. Yona asked why Iksu lives in such a remote area. He just wants to live where flowers bloom. After the walk, the princess thanked Yoon and asked about the priests. The kid is only watching for Iksu, but once upon a time, priests were more powerful than emperors. They were called God's messengers. They participated in the government and could start a bloody war. One priest overthrew an emperor who provoked the wrath of God. From then on, they became a threat to the emperor. During Junon's reign, Kuka was expanding its borders, and Yuhong played no small part in this. Priests were a threat to him, so the emperor banished them. But Iksu, on the contrary, it was better to live in silence, so once wanted to help all the people, and in the end he almost died himself. Yona thanked Yoon. In the night, Moon woke up and didn't see Hak, so she ran to look for him. She fell down and almost cried. She called him a fool, and he showed up immediately. He wanted to hear that she was happy for his recovery, instead of insults. Hak went to look for his spear, and the princess yelled at him for not warning her. Hak wanted to kiss her, but they bumped foreheads. The princess thought he wanted her to check his temperature. Hak apologized for messing up Yona's hair, but she said that was even better. All that mattered to her was that he was alive, and the rest didn't matter. She'd been worried sick all this time, but she couldn't throw it away. In the morning, Yoon baked tortillas, which Hak ate quietly. He got angry and said to stop carrying them. Yona went to find the priest. He had a dream about her and their world at night. She wanted to know her true path. She had originally wanted to wait for her time, but now she would not let anyone take her life or Hak's life. Iksu said that Yona's life would create a true storm that would shake the Kook Empire to its very foundation. When the darkness falls to the earth, dragon's blood will bring hope back to the world. According to the ancient divine lead, when the 4 dragons come together, then the sword shield will be awakened, and the fire dragon will return early at dawn. Hak doesn't believe him. Yona remembered the legend of the creation of the empire. A fire dragon descended to rule the empire. It was the first emperor, Kiryu. The people of his country forgot their own god and became mired in wars. Even the emperor was taken prisoner. When the world was on the verge of resolution, 4 dragons descended from the sky. Kiryu refused their help. He loved the humans, but the dragons loved the emperor. They shared their blood with the humans, giving them their power. One got claws that could cut metal, another could see everything 100 miles away. The third got strong legs and could leap to the sky. The fourth got a strong body that could not be hurt. They had to protect the emperor at the cost of their lives, so they became clan heads. They cried when Hiryu died of old age. After that, they left the empire as their power was uncontrollable. Yona didn't understand how that related to her. There would be many dangers waiting for them when they left those lands, and Hawk is not immortal. Yona needed powerful allies. She needed to find dragon warriors. They do exist. Princess doesn't want Hawk dead, but she's not sure the dragons would want to share power with her. Iksu says they survived and found him for a reason. They can probably find the dragon warriors by God's will too. But the heavens can only show them the way, and they must walk it themselves. At night, Yona looked at the moon. She didn't know what to do. The princess wanted to throw away Suwon's hairpin, but she couldn't do it so easily. Hawk came up behind her. He was feeling much better. Yona wanted to find people with dragon blood. The young man said they didn't exist, and could also be hostile to them. But Yona had to become stronger. She asked to be taught how to shoot and use a sword. The princess didn't want to die miserable and helpless, and she also didn't want to lose Hawk. She was ready to appeal to the gods themselves. They started to joke around with each other when the priest came in. He was going to offer them something. Iksu asked Yona to take Yoon with him. She thought about it all night. In the morning, the guy gave the princess some new clothes he had made himself. She was very happy with the new clothes and wanted to trim her hair. Yoon helped her. He told her that he learned how to cook and heal people because of living with Iksu. Yona said he was very kind. Yoon helped her, even though he said he didn't like princesses. He said it wasn't for free. Yona replied that Moondok would pay for everything. Yoon knew him as the greatest general. So he finished with the haircut. Turns out the guy remembered every book he had read. But it pissed him off that there were many more books he hadn't read yet. Yoon is slowly collecting books. He's quite happy reading this junk. Iksu brought it but tore it up on the way. Yoon called him clumsy and added that all his predictions are true because the man can't lie. Yona went to see him. Iksu praised her appearance. To the princess, he reminded her of her father. The priest asked how the conversation with Yoon went, but Yona said she couldn't take him with her, because then she would separate the family. If Yoon wanted to go with her, she would agree. The guy heard their conversation, so he went to ask Iksu right after. He wanted Yoon to help Hawk and Yona with the search, and also to see the world instead of being in the middle of nowhere. Yoon wanted to burn that very book out of anger, but he realized that Iksu was just taking care of him. On the riverbank, he met Hawk, who was catching and frying fish. Yoon asked him why he was willing to risk his life so much for the princess. Hawk just wants to protect her. Yoon went to the waterfall. Memories came flooding back to him. 7 years ago, he lived in a small Fire Clan village that had no crops. Yoon hadn't eaten in a long time, and was about to steal from passers-by. Iksu, whom Yoon didn't know yet, was just passing by. The kid threw a rock at him, and when the man fell, he was about to steal from him. Iksu apologized, for he had nothing. Yoon threatened him. The man started crying because he had already given all the money to the other child. Iksu wasn't angry about being beaten up and was about to leave. Yoon wouldn't let him go, and the man was just looking for a place to sleep at night. Yoon put ointment on his wounds at night. The next day, Iksu gave him potatoes, which he exchanged for his shoes. It was a thank you for the ointment. Yoon called him strange. He wanted to go to the capital and read all the books. Iksu promised to bring him all the books. He taught Yoon how to weave shoes. The boy became sad when the priest started to leave. He wanted to ask him to stay next time. Thanks to the braided shoes, Yoon was able to get his own food. As time went on, Yoon became sadder and sadder without Iksu. Then one day he came back, dirty and ragged. Yoon was worried. It turned out that Iksu had wanted to bring him a lot of nice things, but people had taken everything away from him. The priest was going to live away from them, so he came to say goodbye to Yoon. The boy didn't want to let him go alone, so he said he would go with him. He didn't want to go to the capital anymore, and he didn't need the books. Yoon was very attached to Iksu, even though he didn't want to say it openly. There were many warm memories Yoon had of Iksu bonding with him. He was afraid to leave him alone. In reality, a priest came to him and brought him sandals. He never learned how to weave them, but he tried hard. Yoon wove the sandals for Iksu because his sandals were worn out. The man accidentally tripped, but this time, he didn't fall. He said he would be fine. Yoon used to think the princess was spoiled, but that one just hadn't faced reality before, and that was sad. They were from different worlds. Yoon was willing to go with Yona and Hak to search for dragons, and he also believed that Iksu could do it without him. But the priest was sad to let him go. After all, they had been through a lot together. In the evening, Yona was already packing. Hak didn't mind Yuna. He was less of a burden than the princess in his opinion. In the morning, they were ready to go. Yoon only brought a bag with him. It contained many herbs for healing. He said goodbye to Iksu and set off on his journey. The boy was sad, but the anticipation of a great adventure was exciting him. Soo-won sat in the library and read the scrolls. Kae-suk had brought him a secret report that the tax collectors were pocketing some of the money. All those responsible had already been removed from their posts. The kindness of the past emperor had awakened the greed and lust for easy gain in some. Kae-suk also brought a book that everyone was strictly forbidden to read. It was said about the 4 dragons. As a child, Soo-won loved to read this book, and he felt sorry that it was fiction. Meanwhile, Yoon was exchanging medicine at a familiar merchant for rice. The man didn't expect to see the kid in the company of others. He asked who the strange gentleman next to Yoon was. Hak replied that he was a merchant like the old man. The old man fell behind, and they went on their way. They hid Yona in a sack, which Hak carried on his shoulder. The princess took offense at him after that. The young man didn't understand why, because he said there were clothes inside or because he almost dropped them. Yona was angry. She couldn't even think of a punishment for such insolence. Yoon asked them to keep their behavior down, since they were near the borders of the fire clan. The priest said that people with dragon blood roamed the lands, so finding out their location was quite problematic. But one of them lived in a clan far away in the mountains. They didn't like outsiders there, guarding the dragon's blood. To reach him, one had to go straight through the capital of the fire clan. Yoon was going to write down his impressions. A merchant passed by. Yona hid under her cloak and wasn't recognized. She didn't want Hak carrying her all the time because of her unhealed wounds. Besides, she wanted to see their land. While Hak was reprimanding Yona, she and Yoon spotted a water wheel. There was a shoulder of wheat. That was where her brother got most of his food for the emperor from. They went to the village and bought everything for the journey. They had to split up with Hak. He went to look for a bow, and at the same time looked for a small knife for the princess' self-defense. Yoon and Yona stayed in the place and waited for. People were talking about Soo-won's coronation. Yona was happy for the people of the Wind Clan. When they came out, they almost ran into the Fire Clan soldiers. They had to hide, and they were very lucky. Hak found them quickly. They had to leave immediately. They passed people, and those people were discussing that the emperor would never understand the hardships of the common people. Next, they walked for days through the mountains. The princess wanted to learn how to defend herself. Hak asked if she could hurt or kill the man. She said she could at least escape. The young man gave her a bow and arrows to practice with. Yona's father had forbidden her to put weapons in her hands, and Hak was breaking orders. The first training was to be done on birds and rabbits, which were to be their dinner. She couldn't get in. Hak started explaining everything from scratch. He said to never rely on sight alone. Even at night, she learned to shoot. Yoon cooked their meals. Yona had bow wounds on her palms. Yoon knew how to shoot too, but he thought it was better for the princess not to take up arms. She wasn't ready to kill, and she was about to lose her life. They moved further into the road. Yona wanted to shoot a small boar, but her hand shook. They were already close to that very clan. Yoon went onward while Hak and the princess stopped to practice. He said to shoot at him. The boy easily dodged and caught the arrows. Yona lacked the urge to kill. Hak said to imagine her shooting at Soo-won. The princess left a scratch on his cheek. She deliberately took the weapons, realizing what she would have to sacrifice. Hak said not to say that Yona wanted to protect him. Because of feelings. He had a duty to protect her, and she had nothing to worry about. They moved on. Walking into the fog, they didn't realize where Yoon had gone. There wasn't much to see, but Yona noticed his things on the ground. She started yelling, trying to find him. Then the wind picked up and someone started telling them to get away. They were threatened with the fury of the gods at making an unnecessary move. Hak said their gods were cowards for hiding in the fog and attacking travelers. He swung his spear and the fog cleared a bit. They were surrounded by archers who were aiming at them. They were the ones who had captured Yuna. When the archers noticed Yona's red hair, they immediately put their weapons away. She told them that they had been directed by the priest. The people from the White Dragon clan promised to show them the way to the village. Yuna kept a white dragon in a cage in the village. Hawk Yona had only just gotten there. The boy was angry that he was being ignored like that. Yun was finally released. The elder apologized for such a rude reception. The White Dragon had come to them after the war centuries ago, and since then, they had chased away anyone who wanted to take its power. The villagers had to protect the dragon-blooded man at the cost of their lives. All the women and girls of the village swarmed around Yona, saying that she was very beautiful. Hawk clarified that it was only about the hair. The villagers revere red hair because a white dragon once served Emperor Hiryu. They were all waiting for her to come. But it might not be the right person. The old man didn't say what would be done to them if Yona turned out to be the wrong person. Yun asked Hawk, protect him in case of trouble. The man said he would think about it. They didn't understand why everyone was guarding one person if they were descendants of the White Dragon. But only that one possessed the blood of a dragon. Ever since he was born, a dragon had been living in his right hand. That same guy's right hand was pulsing strangely. Grandma almost made a fuss about it. She takes everything personally. They've been protecting him all his life, but he was supposed to protect them. The boy was their pride, though he felt he had to help them. What else was he given the power for? The old woman was sure that the time had not yet come. Those heirs of that power might be able to use it when their lord comes. The guy just needs to stay in the village and not worry about anything. That year he turned 20, and the old woman told him to marry several girls. The boy replied that one would be enough for him, but he hadn't found her yet either. The village was busier than usual. The old woman told him about the strangers who had come and that they were not ordinary people, though they were not expelled. The boy went to see who the guards had let in. He hoped to use the dragon's power. When a white dragon's heir is born, the predecessor has all of its power lost. Yona was embarrassed that they had come to take her away. She pulled the sword from Hawk and said that if the dragon refused to help, Hawk would train her. The guy was walking towards them with that power, about to kill the strangers, but froze when he saw Yona. His arm began to ache. It was the dragon's blood reacting to the one it was supposed to serve. As a child, Kijay, that boy, had been told that one day there would be someone he would have to protect. The boy asked when the emperor would be reborn. His father said that his blood itself would sense that very person. Yona was him. Kijay fainted at the sight of her, and his hand began to burn. He finally woke up and was ready to serve the princess. The white dragon was glad that he would finally be able to fulfill his duty. Yona was like a goddess to him. She told him that she was traveling to gather all 4 dragons. The old woman immediately came running and said to have a feast in honor of the emperor's return. Hawk mocked the princess again. Kijay's hand was burning because of his meeting with Yona. He hid away from everyone and thought about how his father might be proud of him. That's when Hawk came to his room and started looking around. He was looking for anything they could use on their journey. The white dragon gave him a bag of gold to get Hawk to leave the village, because now Kijay would protect Yona herself. She stood up for Hawk. He's her childhood friend, and he's been protecting her all this time. But Kijay should also go with them, because it would be hard for Hawk alone. The boys argued with each other. In the evening, there was a celebration in the village. The old woman had raised 4 dragons in her lifetime, and the emperor had finally arrived. In the morning, they set out on their journey. Kijay said goodbye to everyone. The villagers promised to protect the village. The boy said that even if he died, a new heir would be born who could protect the village. The elders cried and said not to think about such things. They were sad. Grandma brought a bunch of stuff for the road, even a beauty. Kijay only took a little with him on the road. It was hard for Grandma to let the boy go. After all, she had raised him. She promised to greet him before anyone else when he got home. Yun himself was feeling a little sad about saying goodbye like that. Yona asked where they should go next. Kijay can point to the dragons. There are bonds between them. That was convenient. Yona wanted to know his name, since everyone just called him White Dragon. The princess said he had a beautiful name, and they set off on their journey. Kijay was glad that the day had come when the emperor arrived. He had promised to protect Yona. Hawk had called him a snake. Their relationship was not particularly friendly. Both wanted to protect the princess themselves. She kicked them so they wouldn't fight, and warned Kijay that Hawk had a hobby of teasing people. The white dragon could sense others due to the call of blood. Closest thing to them was the blue dragon. Yoon couldn't trust the man who had spent his entire life in greenhouse conditions so easily. Kijay said not to worry, for he knew a lot about the world thanks to the scouts. While he was saying that, managed to fall into a hole. There were a lot of centipedes there that Kijay didn't know about. He didn't like insects. Hawk joked with him. And then they sensed the strangers approaching. Yona and Yoon hid. Hawk and Kijay were surrounded by bandits. They mistook Yoon for a woman. One of the enemies approached the white dragon and grabbed his right arm, immediately getting burned. He was scared out of his mind. Kijay told them not to grab at anything. He released his hand and it enlarged to look like a huge paw. He quickly scattered his opponents with it. Hawk marveled at his strength, but he wasn't inferior to Kijay, scattering everyone with his spear. He and Hawk continued to argue. The white dragon also recognized his strength. Yona wanted to help them, but since Hawk had forbidden it, she wouldn't take up the bow. Yoon said that was what she had been practicing for. Yona aimed at the man who wanted to attack Hawk from behind and hit him, but Yona was grabbed by one of the men. However, the dragon and thunder beast beat him down immediately. Kijay beat 28 people. Hawk said that in that case, he's 40. But before that, the guy himself admitted that he didn't count. And then Kijay's arm got sore and a black and blue aura appeared around it. He said that he probably overdid it and that he should have fought more restrained. Hawk, on the other hand, was happy to see the white dragon become so bloodthirsty during the fight. In the palace, no one had tried to fight back against him, so he was marveling at Kijay's strength. And immediately, he collapsed without strength. His wound had opened up. The white dragon was surprised at Hawk's strength with his condition. Yona tried to drag him, but only succeeded in pulling his hair. Kijay used the dragon's hand to easily pick the boy up. The other hand could barely hold the arrows and bow. Kijay told Yona not to worry. He said she just wanted to protect him too, like he always did. The white dragon said she was strong too, since she wasn't afraid to join the fight. Kijay didn't know if it was the dragon's blood call, but he wanted to protect Yona who had shed so many tears. Toward nightfall, they dined on the mountain plant soup that Yoon had prepared. Kijay wasn't ready for that. He asked how Yona could eat such a thing. She replied that their food tasted better now because the two of them and Hawk were completely bad. Yoon laughed because of that, and Kijay cried for her. Hawk woke up when he heard the nasty things about his cooking. Yona offered to feed him because of his wounds, but Kijay decided to do the black work for her. Yoon asked about the blue dragon's whereabouts. A long time ago, his clan lived in the Land Clan's territory, but then the whole village disappeared. Since dragons could change locations, they just went somewhere. Yoon knew at least 6 villages there, and they agreed to set off the next morning. Kijay didn't get a good night's sleep. Yoon had told them to keep a low profile, but it was hard to arrange. There were only 3 places left. Near the village they came to, there was a military drill of the Fire Clan, and the blue dragon wasn't there. They traveled onward. The next village did not have him, nor did the others. Kijay could sense him somewhere in the mountains. He didn't understand how they could walk so much and sleep right under the starry sky. He wanted to make their search easier by finding the blue dragon's location. Kijay fell asleep, but was awakened by Yona shooting. She was shooting 200 arrows a night. Hawk said to stay out of her way. He didn't want her to fight, but he wanted her to be able to defend herself. The white dragon wanted madly to help her find the blue dragon. Yona said that no one could replace Kijay. That one cheered up. There was another village among the mountains, right on the border, and that was where the blue dragon was. In the mountains, everything was in snow. There was a place that looked like a stone castle. It was hard to imagine that anyone could live there. They went inside. People didn't greet them in a particularly friendly manner. Kijay bluntly told them to call the blue dragon to them, while Yoon thought about what they should do. The elder said, there was no one with that name in the village. Kijay said that it was a dragon descendant, but the elder kept saying that he had no idea who they were talking about. It's just an ordinary mountain village. Yona apologized. She said they were mistaken, but they were tired, and there was a wounded man among them. The villagers couldn't offer them good conditions because of poverty. The elder took them to a room and told them not to wander there at night because they have the cave as a labyrinth. They are not responsible for wanderers. Yona believed Kijay and knew the dragon was out there somewhere. Yoon was going to go for a walk and find the blue dragon at the same time. He drew a map, but they kept hitting dead ends. Yona wanted to leave since the blue dragon was aware of their presence, but was in no hurry to show herself. Kijay said not to give up so easily, for surely all the dragons would wish to meet her. Even though Yona wasn't the Hiryu Emperor, she needed a dragon anyway. Princess heard a sound and casually opened the passage. The others didn't follow her. She ran after the squirrel, and the entrance closed behind her. The fire went out. A man appeared in front of her and promised to take her to her friends. She was told that they had been warned about the labyrinth and that they did not have the blue dragon, and that no one lived in the farthest room. The man dragged Yona down somewhere, and she started to call out to Huck for help. The masked man saved her. The princess was not afraid of him, and he led her. Everyone was worried about Yona, and then she was found. The man was with her. Kijay recognized him as the blue dragon, and he immediately fled. It brought back memories from 18 years ago. Back then, he had just been born, and his mother had committed suicide. He was raised by the previous dragon. The first thing he saw was darkness. 4 years passed. He wanted to play with the children, but everyone was afraid of him. Al, the previous blue dragon, told him not to go out and to stay in his room. The child was looking for friends. The man said he would never be able to do that. The boy asked why everyone was afraid of him. There were rumors going around the village that one who looked into the eyes of the blue dragon would turn to stone. In fact, the eyes could paralyze that person to the point of cardiac arrest. The boy wanted to cry, but Ao told him not to cry. He considered himself cursed, and this power is connected to the village. Even if one leaves it, an heir to this power will be born there. The boy saw the bandits approaching a few miles away, while Ao's vision was deteriorating. The bandits wanted to capture a man with strange powers. Ao came to defeat them, thus saving the village. He defeated them easily, and told the boy to learn to fight. Ao said not to use the eyes as weapons, otherwise it would paralyze the body, the one using them. The boy asked if he would have friends if he defended everyone with a sword. The answer was no. Ao strode forward, and the boy thought he was about to be abandoned, but the man's palm was open. He and the boy walked on, holding hands. Ao had taught him everything, replacing his father, but he grew weaker with each passing year. The boy did his best to help him. Ao had gone blind by then and wanted to die, free of his power and become human. The boy started wearing bells on his mask to make it easier for Ao to follow him. The man started crying and apologizing for leaving him. The boy asked to talk about something else. Ao died. From then on, the child lived on his own. He cried a lot and for a long time because of his loneliness. The boy saw several dozen soldiers heading towards their village. They were brought by that bandit. The child ran to defend the villagers. He defeated an entire army and his body became paralyzed. In reality, he sat and stroked a squirrel. Yona thought about how warm his hand was. The blue dragon could barely move around the cave because of the pain in his eyes. All because of Yona. Someone's voice appeared in his head, telling him to serve Hiryu and never betray him. The blood in the dragon's body boiled. He himself didn't realize why he had mistaken Kijay for a white dragon. He was walking back to his place. Yona told him about what had happened. Kijay wanted to show everyone the power of his anger. Hawk said to calm down, even though he was going to go and kill everyone. They clarified if that guy was definitely the dragon minimum. This village was strange, not like Kijay's. But the latter was sure that the dragons were eager to meet their master. He decided to leave the village the moment he saw Yona. But not everyone could do that. The blue dragon still saved Princess, and his hands were gentle. She wanted to go to the labyrinth again to see him. Huck had told her to stay there. But Yona was going to go there anyway and asked Huck to stay there. He had to agree. He told her to go back by herself this time, or else he would be hanging around her like an annoying fly. Huck asked Kijay to be careful. He knew the residents were watching them, so he decided to spook them. The others had already headed into the maze. Yoon asked if Yona was worried about Huck. She said she relies on him too much when he's around. That's the way it should be. But the princess thinks that Huck is only following the orders of the late emperor, and hopes to give him his freedom one day. And so they came to the same impasse. Kijay sensed someone else's presence. Yoon and Yona went on alone. The white dragon wasn't going to let the residents harm the princess. The blue dragon sensed Kijay and the others approaching. And so they found him. Yona bent down behind the squirrel and asked his name. The blue dragon called him Ao. The princess introduced herself and asked his real name, but he didn't have one. The blue dragon defended himself with his sword. He didn't understand why everyone had come there. Yona asked to borrow her power. He felt that he had been waiting to meet her. Guy grabbed the princess and said that everyone who wanted the power of dragons were enemies. But the hand did not rise to kill Yona. She said she was not his enemy. She just wanted the 4 dragons, though she offered him to be her ally. The blue dragon was certain that he was cursed and that the outside world must not learn of his power. He asked Yona to leave. She said one last thing. His hand was gentle. She knew nothing about the curse of nothing, but she didn't care about him, as long as it was the hand of the cursed. The boy remembered a long-forgotten feeling. Yona felt like she had abandoned him in a dark cage. They walked back to Kijay's place. The villagers wanted to kill them and hide the dragon. They considered the dragon's power as a curse. Kijay fended off a blow from one of them, causing a landslide to start. Hawk ran to their aid, but it was too late. The entrance was blocked by rocks, blocking the maze. Huck began trying to shovel them away. He began to blame himself for not being able to protect her. Yona fainted. She wanted to figure things out for herself, but now she was shaking with fear. Kijay had gotten through to her. The exit to the cave was blocked. All the inhabitants began to worry for their well-being. The white dragon promised to save them. Yoon was afraid, but Yona reassured him. Kijay was going to dig for rocks. The villagers began to blame the blue dragon for everything. For 100 years, they had children with dragon eyes, and even when one died, a new one was born. Everyone was afraid that it was their child, who might turn out to be the monster. After the birth, they put a mask on the dragon and would not let it out of the room. Because the blue dragon used its power and killed many soldiers, the people were afraid that new ones would come. So they moved into the caves. The inhabitants didn't realize what it was, if not a curse. Just then a blue dragon came out. He walked straight ahead, and one of the men was frightened of him and threw off his mask. Yona marveled at the beauty of his eyes. The inhabitants were sure that if they looked into its eyes, they would turn to stone. But Yona knew that a blue dragon could not suddenly kill someone. The boy closed his eyes and put on his mask. He took an axe and started chopping a passage in the side wall. The wall was thinner there. Yona was going to help them, so she took the knife from the residents. Yoon did as well. The rest of the residents crowded around Huck. Behind the rubble were their loved ones. The boy said to tell him everything they knew. Yona on the other side kept digging, but she was getting dizzy. The blue dragon carried her to his room, as there was more air there, and covered her with his fur just in case, then put a squirrel on top. Yona cried because of the blue dragon's kindness and the villagers' blindness. The boy went there to help the villagers and they hate him. It hurt the princess to see his loneliness. She wanted to help him. Yona had been locked up all her life too, only in different conditions. It wasn't until she was pushed out of her comfort zone that she realized how good it felt to just breathe and live. The princess wanted to take the blue dragon out of the darkness so he would agree to square his shoulders and be himself. He couldn't believe such a place really existed. But subconsciously, he knew the answer to the question. Yona came back and started to help break down the wall. On the other side of the wall was Huck poking holes in it. He immediately hugged the princess. The blue dragon realized that the place filled with light was next to Yona. It turns out that Huck had been helped by the residents. The princess didn't want to leave the blue dragon. She said that with her, he wouldn't have to close his eyes. Yona knew he couldn't take offense. They shook hands and the boy cried. He bowed to the inhabitants and went after his new comrade. The bells fell down. The blue dragon had found his friends at last. When they got far away from the village, Yoon asked about the next dragon to Kijay. The one had fallen unconscious. He was probably overworked. His body was not listening to him. He had a very faint sense of the next dragon's location. Yona asked the blue dragon where the others were. Kijay promised to teach his brother everything, but he left to the waterfall, then jumped into the pond. The white dragon thought he had decided to drown himself. In fact, he was fishing for Kijay. Thanks to the blue dragon, they were able to make fish soup by evening. He was pleased with Yun's food. The one was embarrassed about it. Yona offered the guy a cape because his clothes were soaking wet, and the blue dragon called her by name. Everyone was surprised at how easily he did it. Yona offered to give him a name. Yun used to think that knowing was deceitful and arrogant. The guy was worried about being rude to her the first time he met her. He also wanted to call her by her first name. Yona stepped back toward the lake. Huck couldn't leave her, worried that something might happen again. Yona wanted Huck to call her princess in honor of her late father, so that at least someone would remember the imperial family. When the collapse happened, Huck begged Yona's father not to take her away. He treasured her too much. The blue dragon, meanwhile, stood in the middle of the field and enjoyed the view. Huck and Yona were thinking of a name for it, and just then, they came across the blue dragon. His name was now Shin-Ah. It became the moonlight for the princess. In the morning, Kijay sensed the green dragon. They went in search of the green dragon through the mountains to avoid unwanted encounters. Thanks to Shin-Ah's vision, they were perfectly safe. And Kijay was also cheered up with the presence of his dragon blood brother. They came across a village that was empty and an epidemic roaming around. All the soldiers had been taken from there for the war. The man they helped called the past emperor terrible. Because of him, the 5 clans had become isolated and the empire was in chaos. The man hoped that Su-won could save their world. Yona was unpleasant to hear such things about his father. No one grieved over his death, and no one cared about the lonely princess. Huck didn't think the former emperor was a fool or a coward. That one hid all the pain. He would never serve a bad emperor, and the guy would be tormented for the rest of his life by the fact that he couldn't save him. Yona cried because of what she had learned and heard. Squirrel helped morally. At night, Yona practiced again, firing arrows. She needed to get stronger to protect everyone. Meanwhile, Su-won arrived at the Land Clan. General Guntae missed the time of Junan's reign. Back then, he had fought like a god. The servant reminded him that the general had lost to the Thunder Beast. He excused himself for being out of shape. Another servant came running in and told of the emperor's arrival. Everyone was surprised. Heavenly General Judo had also arrived. Su-won had a request. The journey wasn't easy, so he asked for a cup of tea. The tea was very tasty. It turned out that the tea leaves were picked from Guntae's wife's plantation. He and Judo started arguing. Su-won asked to see the place where the tea was grown. This was the first time he'd been to Cheshin. The palace needed repairs, but they didn't have time for that. An old man came and told him about the collapse in the mine. It turned out that Su-won was a passerby in the Earth Clan. The servant asked how the emperor could be traveling around when the capital was in chaos. Gentae sieged him, reminding him who he was talking to, and asked Su-won what he thought of the past emperor. Gentae was on bad terms with him. He was quietly giving away lands to other empires for the sake of the people. But in the end, many people lived in poverty, and if Su-won was going to do the same, Gentae was willing to rebel against him. He just wanted to know what the new emperor's policies would be, especially since he was traveling and drinking tea in such troubled times. Gentae recalled Su-won's words during the coronation and asked if the guy could fulfill his promise. Su-won was evasive. In Gontae's eyes, he was hopeless and completely unlike his father. Su-won became interested in the stones worshipped by the people of the Earth Clan. In the end, Gontae left. The servant kept apologizing for saying the words about rebellion. The general was just depressed because he hadn't been on the battlefield in a long time. He was depressed at not being able to defend the empire. Su-won remembered Huck and the Wind Clan. He noticed how the general was admired by everyone. The new emperor also wanted to see him in action, but there were no wars. And then Su-won announced that he was preparing for war. Guntae was excited, but he was immediately disappointed when he found out that the war was just an event for people. Even real swords wouldn't be there. The general was ready to kick Su-won's ass. Judo said that there was no time for games. The festival was already planned in a week. The people from the Earth Clan wanted this festival. Gontae didn't understand him at all.